Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. I'm calling this episode Robertson's Return equals Deranged, Fundamentalist, Apocalyptic Nihilists, and End Times Warmongering. So this is a really a elaboration or reframing of an excellent commentary by Cenk Uygur, and also they're pointing out reporting plus commentary about Pat Robertson, the very old fundamentalist preacher, Christian fundamentalist preacher, who had a huge following in televangelist, who retired last year, but came out of retirement to make a statement about the war, Putin's war in Ukraine, and Cenk and Anna. I'm going to put a link in the description box for this video, and you should see it. But I'm going to talk about basically the sequence of the events, or why it's so important for us to see this. Not because we're going to see much more of Pat Robertson. He's a very, very old man, I believe in his 90s, or very late 80s, but because his ideology, his religious-based ideology, is very, very widespread in the halls of power in the United States. And basically, anyway, Robertson was moved to come out of retirement to essentially say that Putin is an instrument of God, okay, to create the apocalypse. And this end times theology, which has been around for about 40 years or so on the Christian right, and where they believe that a cataclysmic war will take place centered on Israel, and he thinks that. So anyway, this is Robertson has a psychotic reading of what the war is going on, what the war will happen, how it will proceed, and he talks about a land bridge over the Dardanelles in Turkey to the Mideast. So where Putin is this figure who will initiate this apocalyptic end times scenario, and this is there's not much basis for this. I mean, it's not clear that Putin has these ambitions with regard to further south of Ukraine and so forth and so on, and though he might trigger a third world war, and that might be also an end times, an apocalypse. But anyway, the way Robertson portrays it, he talks about Putin as being in some sense just this instrument, this vessel of divine will to create this apocalypse, and it's this is so dangerous in so many different levels, because not only is Putin independently dangerous, and the war in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, is dangerous, and the threats of nuclear weapons and so forth and so on. But that you see this convergence of what I've been calling apocalyptic nihilists. So you have people who are drawn together. I mean, and Trump also had an apocalyptic nihilist, even though he wasn't a very religious person. He understood the apocalyptic nihilistic sense of the evangelical Christian community, and he, as I've written, or as I wrote, about a year ago or so, or actually 2 years ago, when I introduced the concept of apocalyptic nihilism, that there are different routes to that state of mind that which is extremely dangerous and is extremely can be in a form of a psychosis. Okay, and it does have there is the apocalypse and enacting the apocalypse and living in the apocalyptic world. This abstracted world is a form of psychotic thinking that is supported by religion, among other things. Also can be supported to some degree by political ideologies, by conflict, by armed conflict, where people imagine a glorious end to the world based on, in our times, with nuclear weapons, that becomes a potential reality quite easily. I mean, not super easily, but much before 1945. It was very hard to imagine that happening, but with such the concentration of power within various nuclear bureaucracies and political administrations in Russia and the United States and in other countries as well, with nuclear weapons, that you have instantaneous decisions that can be made that will engender mass destruction and apocalyptic level of destruction, and potentially destruction of all of humanity. So anyway, apocalyptic nihilism is something that can come out of one's personal psychology, often from very serious mental illness of various kinds, visions of apocalyptic, destruction, as a way, in some sense, it can be a sense of giving up on the ordinary frustrations of life for people with certain character issues or certain severe mental illnesses, like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or so forth and so on, where they can tend toward psychosis. And also, in someone like Donald Trump seemed to have an interest in nuclear weapons from very early on in his life, even before he was really seriously interested in politics. He thought at one time in the 1980s that he could solve the nuclear issue, that he became fascinated by it. When there was still a USSR and so forth. So, in fact, his interest in the Russia and the USSR seems to stem in part from this sort of fascination with apocalyptic destruction, or the potential for it, or the amount of power that comes from contemplating it, negotiating it, whatever it is, or imagining what might happen if some nuclear war occurs. So, but anyway, so you have different routes to apocalyptic nihilism. So with Trump, he recognized that in this telling that I'm saying, that he could found in evangelicals another group that had this sense of that basically that all problems could be resolved through this end, or at least certainly in the worst case scenario for them, or maybe the best case scenario. But anyway, in one scenario that they subscribe to, that everything can go boom, okay, and that will be the end of it. And that will be, in the Christian fundamentalist, in the end times theology version, it can be this sort of, apparently their nirvana, their glorious ascension to heaven, while others, the damned, okay, including the Jews, go to hell, okay? So this is where now Cenk is very passionate and strong in this video. He talks about how duped right-wing Jews have been, and right-wing Israelis have been in Zionists, essentially, in thinking that the fundamentalist Christian community is their friend, okay, and that they're willing to accept this philo-Semitism, okay, this, in my opinion, philo-Semitism, and this is maybe my personal opinion as someone who has experienced it, is something that is a smarmy, preferential like of Jews rather than a love of individual of the culture or whatever it is, but simply there's something about it that's wrong, that's off. In this case, but anyway, the particular fundamentalist form of philo-Semitism is simply a tool, okay, for the fundamentalists to achieve their end, which is, and Cenk is very clear on this. The scenario they're talking about, which is that the Jews will be annihilated first, okay, before other groups. In other words, that they will be in this narrative of the end times theology. They will be killed first, okay, and also not be advantaged at all in this great psychotic, but still fundamentalist fantasy about the apocalypse. So anyway, so the danger is also, and Cenk talks about this, the danger in these people, particularly the American Christian fundamentalists, is that their vicinity to military power and to nuclear power, in terms of through the organization of the Republican Party, and also in the military, the various, for instance, through the family, which is this fundamentalist but stealth fundamentalist organization, sort of through various recruitment mechanisms in, for instance, among other places, the military, that one isn't clear how many maybe high-ranking military officers are also ensconced in this psychotic end times apocalyptic nihilist framework. And so so it's very, very important that not only just for Jews, who should reject this form of false friendship by Christian fundamentalists, but also for Americans and overall, that there's nothing virtuous about this. It's mental illness, it's sickness, and it's a dangerous form of mental illness. I'm sorry, apocalyptic nihilism is, I'm not making it a diagnosis, but there are indications that there's deep, at least a cultural malaise, a deep cultural fault in such a destructive, egocentric, religious millenarianism, okay? So it's a form of millenarianism we're talking about, but it's an active form of millenarianism that is concrete in its, it has a fantasy narrative, but also a belief in concrete political action. It's very, very politicized. It's very, and you see with Robertson being triggered to come out of retirement, that he is trying to at least talk to this flock of people and say, supporting in some sense Putin, and supporting, but not only just Putin, supporting war and warmongering. So anyway, and it's so egocentric, selfish, anti-moral, against the teachings of Jesus Christ of Nazareth if you are a follower of that religion. It's a recent adaptation that is post 1960s that is part of this sort of hate-filled reactionary religious devolution, okay, of parts of the American Christian community, and also there are, by the way, in the Jewish religion there are also end times millenarians as well. So and they are almost as dangerous. Okay, they're especially given their alliance with the U.S. military and also with some of these fundamentalists, but they are also, even Israel's, has nukes and can create enormous destruction in the Middle East as well, and they already are on a level for the Palestinians and for neighboring states. Neighboring of Israel. So and anyway, so but this is, and there are also millenarians, as Jake mentioned this in the he doesn't use the word millenarian, but there are also dangerous religious fanatics in other religions and also obviously in Islam, but they are not located as close to the center of power as Christians, number one, American Christians, number one, and particularly these fundamentalists, and they haven't been seeking out, and it's really a religion of power, and a religion of power over other people, and people should be outraged and about how much power these people have and almost how much credence they're given, and because and really there should be a confrontation on a level of mental health, on a level of also even religious theology, on philosophy, where they are sectioned off as extremists rather than as being part of some kind of folksy American mainstream. I mean, Robertson does exude folksiness, as do some of the other televangelists and so forth and so on. But the message needs to be uncovered and basically it needs to be exposed. Okay. So anyway, so I will probably return to this in some future episode, but I wanted to call attention to this because it's very very frightening, and we don't need any more bad actors in the world, and these people are bad actors, creating the conditions for nuclear war, essentially, and for armed conflict when we don't need any more armed conflict than we already have in the world. So anyway, so if you have any thoughts about this or experiences in this area, please relate them and in the comments, and also if you like the video, please like it, and if you're enjoying Politics 2100 or getting something out of it in some way, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.